It was the summer of 1975. A telephone call interrupted what seemed to be just another bleak week in South Bend, Indiana. My mother was fatigued by the presence of my 20-year-old unemployed face constantly around the house. The situation was wearing on us both. The phone rang. It was my cousin, Kenny Teeter, in Louisville, inviting me on an adventure. A friend of my parents is going to his daughter's wedding in L.A. He needs some help with the driving. Kenny said, "Get down to Louisville by 6, and we go to Los Angeles for free." I borrowed $100 from my mother. She smiled as she handed me 5 $20 bills. I packed up a few items, then headed to Louisville. As I pulled out of the driveway, my mother yelled, "Maybe you can get your hair cut in California after you get there." I arrived in Louisville, greeted by Kenny and his parents. Within minutes, Wally showed up. Wally Knee Dirt was in his mid-40s, friendly but edgy. "We gotta get moving. We're already behind schedule," Wally said. We quickly threw our stuff in the back of Wally's Ford Country Squire wagon. Kenny needed some sleep. He nestled in the back of the Country Squire. We headed west out of Louisville. Kenny was snoozing, and Wally and I were left to get to know each other. "What kind of work do you do?" Wally asked. "I'm a student at IU. "What about you?" I said. "I'm a professional salesman. Right now I'm selling memberships at a wholesale club. It's called Cardinal Consumer. They use cardinals on their logo. You know, cardinals are the state bird of Kentucky. Pretty clever advertising, huh?" The Cardinal is a solid place to work. Hey, they don't know it, but the Cardinal is paying for this trip. Ha ha. "What do you mean?" I said. "The trip will be on my expense account." I told them I wanted to go to a conference in L.A., and they agreed to pay for the whole thing. One of the gals at the Cardinal is going to make up some phony receipts. Reimbursement for gasoline will be at least $700. Then there's food and hotels. And then there's the big kahuna, the fake registration fee of $900. God bless the Cardinal. "How long you worked at the Cardinal?" I asked. "About a month," Wally said. "That's pretty ballsy after working there for only a month. You worry about getting caught?" "No. I've done this at lots of places I worked. It's amazing how much people will trust someone they hardly know," he said. I heard Kenny stirring in the back of the wagon. "How are you doing?" I asked. "Oh, I'm okay. I think I might have to take a leak," Kenny said. Wally broke in. "Okay, I just want to let you know that we aren't stopping to pee every 5 minutes, so get the job done when you can. I'm not going to risk being late for the wedding. You understand?" "Yes, sir," Kenny said. "Can we stop and get something to eat?" One of Wally's favorite restaurants, Frijoles y Arroz, appeared at the next interchange. "I'll pull in here and we can get some carry-out. We can save time that way," Wally said. Wally had 2 gigantic bean burritos. He quickly snarfed them down. He gathered his empty paper bag, empty root beer bottle, food wrappings, and napkins. Then he pitched it all out of the passenger window onto the road at 80 miles per hour. I looked at Wally and said, "I guess you're a litter bug." "What do you mean by that?" Wally said. You never heard of Lady Bird Johnson? Oh, I get it. You think I was littering. You better suck it up, Jack, or else someday you'll grow up to make somebody a real nice grandmother, Wally said. A few minutes down the road, Wally blurted out, "That's a New Hampshire plate. I bet they come down here in the summer to fish in the Gulf. That's a long way to go to fish." A few minutes later, "There's one from Ohio. I've never been there. I hear it's nice." A few minutes later, "There's a Florida plate. I wonder what they are doing in Missouri." A few minutes later, "Hey, there's one all the way from Maine. Can you believe that?" "Are you going to do this all across the country?" I asked. "Hey, it's my car, and it's a free country. I have a right to talk about anything I want. You probably don't agree with that. Most of you college boys are just baby Sandinistas," Wally said. I said. It took only 6 hours for open hostility to break out. It was just a matter of time. Wally was remarkably annoying. I decided that I wouldn't let Wally get under my skin. I needed to preserve my energy and good vibes for LA. Kenny and I slept most of the night. Wally refused to let us do any driving. He wanted to see if he could do all of the driving by himself. At 3 a.m., we stopped at a Waffle House. The place reeked of stale coffee, cigarettes, and dirty feet. Kenny and I ate quickly, then went out back by the trash dumpster to get some fresh air and discuss our situation. "How do you put up with that guy?" I said. "I know he's an idiot, but you get used to him after a while," Kenny said. "Is he a friend of yours?" I said. "My parents met him at a Howard Johnson's. They discovered that Wally lives about 4 blocks from us. He just keeps coming around. He drops in about once a week, around dinner time, for a free meal. My parents have just tried to be polite," Kenny said. "I try not to hold being an idiot against people. You know, they can't really help it," Kenny said. "Well, he's smart enough to be ripping off Cardinal Consumer for the cost of this trip. He told me he is making fake receipts to submit for reimbursement," I said. "Lots of people do stuff like that. He's a powerless guy who is just trying to even things up a little bit," Kenny said. "That's an enlightening way to look at theft, Kenny. You sound like John Dillinger," I said. We left the Waffle House and got back on the road. We were running about 3 hours outside of Phoenix. Wally was at the wheel and about to fall asleep. Wally repeatedly slapped his own face to stay awake. We begged him to let us drive. "I can do it myself," Wally yelled hysterically. "We have to make it to Phoenix tonight." Kenny and I took turns yelling at Wally to keep him awake. We pulled into a rest stop. Wally fell unconscious quickly, and we moved him to the back of the country squire. We could finally relax with Wally out of the picture for a while. We need to let Wally know that we aren't going to let him get crazy like that again. That lunatic is going to kill someone, I said. Then a disturbing sound rumbled from the back of the wagon. That was Wally farting in his sleep. This continued like clockwork every 15 minutes for the next 3 hours. We were both disgusted by the volume and length of Wally's foul extrusions. It was like a fireworks display in sound and odor. Kenny and I came up with a nickname for Wally, Farticus Maximus. Wally woke up, and we commended him for the unforgettable colonic display. Wally apologized. Sorry about all the gas. Whenever I eat frijoles y arroz burritos, I'm not right for a week, he said. We reached Phoenix. We agreed that driving would be shared amongst the three of us from this point forward. We had only 400 miles to Los Angeles. Wally suggested that he could drop us off in Santa Monica because Santa Monica had better beaches than LA. This was the first considerate remark Wally had made on the trip. For a moment, I thought the winds of change might be upon us. We found our way to Santa Monica. We spotted a cheap motel, the Tumble Inn. This was a super low rent motel, $8 per night. It was located right across from the beach on Ocean Avenue. We got our stuff out of the country squire. As he was leaving, Wally stopped the country squire and leaned out of the driver's window. He firmly said, "Be at this point on Sunday at noon to get picked up. I'll wait 5 minutes. If you're not here, you have to find another way home. Understood?" "Yes, sir, we understand," Kenny said. "Have a great wedding, Farticus." Wally's face grimaced as he gunned his country squire and peeled out onto Ocean Avenue. "Wow, that guy can sure be an asshole," I said. "Kind of like most people," Kenny said. Kenny and I checked into our room at the Tumble Inn. We picked up the bedspread and 2 towels and then went over to the beach. It was a relief to get away from Wally. As we sat on the beach, we discussed the looming drive home. I'm dreading the trip back. Santa Monica is like heaven. In 5 days, we will have to endure the hell of another 40 hours in a car with Wally, Kenny said. "How about we hitchhike back?" I said. "Too far," Kenny said. "I'm thinking about seeing if my mother would send me a plane ticket. How would you feel about that?" I said. "Please don't abandon me to this insanity," Kenny said. The next day, we made our way into LA and spent the day at MacArthur Park, the legendary hippie playground. Some guy handed us a doobie, and we officially christened our arrival into hippiedom. We mentally floated around MacArthur Park for a few hours, checking things out, talking with people, smelling flowers, observing beauty. We went to Disneyland the next day. This felt a little childish. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone over age 6. The following day, the afternoon hours were spent on the beach. In the evening, we hitched to the Sunset Strip. Despite a shortage of cash, we splurged on a couple of beers. The lavish insanity of West LA was on full display. For 6 hours, we basked in the glow of ubiquitous neon lights. Our final excursion was a meandering hitchhiking trip around the LA area. This was purely for the sake of adventure. no destination involved. We were picked up by a van on the south side of the LA basin near the Santa Monica Pier, and we made our way north to Brentwood. We soon found ourselves on a hilltop overlooking the LA metropolis while sitting beneath a Catalina cherry tree. Our driver's name was Alfred Brundage. "Man, I just love it up here," Alfred said. He pulled a bottle of apple wine out of his van and handed us a doobie. "This is called lamb's wool. It's from Africa," he said. Kenny and I sat down and lit it up. The lamb's wool came on strong. The African weed was potentiated by the surreal nature of the scene. The panoramic view of the valley was like a psychedelic dream. Alfred pulled a guitar out of his van and sat down with us. He played a few songs. Kenny and I became engrossed by the magnificent beauty of it all. "I come here to meditate. As you can see, this is a very powerful place. It conveys a whole different perspective of the city and the world. If you open your mind, the city resembles a living organism," Alfred said. Alfred closed his eyes and paused for a few moments. Then he smiled. "Ah, yes." The mother of the Buddha leaned against a cherry tree as she gave birth to the enlightened one, Alfred said as we sat beneath the Catalina cherry tree. I was deeply affected. For several months, I wondered if I should become a Buddhist. We returned to the Tumble Inn. "Today was just what we needed," I said. "Tomorrow, for better or for worse, we will be on the road with Wally. I could use a few more days in Santa Monica instead," Kenny said. Sunday arrived. At 11:45 a.m., we checked out of the Tumble Inn and took a seat on a park bench to wait for Wally to pick us up at noon. By 2 p.m., Wally had not shown up yet. We agreed to give it another hour. If Wally didn't show by then, the thumbs come out. The country squire pulled around the corner at 2:30 p.m. It was followed by a police car, which parked behind Wally. Wally and the policeman both got out of their cars and approached Kenny and me. "The officer can explain why I'm so late," Wally said. "I'm Officer Alexander Edmund Odell with the Los Angeles Police Department. Mr. Knee Dirt had a mishap yesterday, and we became involved. He was at a wedding yesterday and disrupted the ceremony. He was then taken to a psychiatric hospital for an evaluation. He was released about an hour ago on the condition that he follow through with plans to return to Kentucky today. Can you assure me that you will supervise his exit from Los Angeles?" he said. We promised the officer that we would make sure that Wally left the city. We threw our stuff in the country squire and headed east toward Kentucky. A few miles down the road, Wally spoke. "Okay, I'll tell you what happened. The wedding was for my ex-wife, Loretta, not for my daughter. When the preacher asked if there was anyone who had reason to object to the wedding, I stood up and said, 'I object.' 'What is your objection?' the preacher asked. "Because Loretta is my wife," I said. "Loretta promised to be my wife until death does us part. Then she decided to leave me after 3 years. She said she got a divorce, but I never agreed to it. Loretta is still my wife. She is still Loretta Kneedirt. Bigamy is still a crime in America. And you, Mr. Preacher, if you complete this ceremony, you will be committing a crime. So you better think hard about what you're doing." The preacher asked me to come to his office, and I refused. I got really pissed off, and the police showed up. The police dragged me off to a stress center. They made me stay all night. I agreed to leave town to avoid going to jail for disorderly conduct. What a crock of bull! I'm an American citizen. I have a right to free speech. This isn't Russia. This is America. They should have arrested Loretta, not me. She's a filthy Sandinista bigamist. At that moment, I realized that Wally was even more of a lunatic than I thought. Kenny faced Wally and said, "Let's just have an easy ride back home. Steve and I will drive. Wally, you just relax. It sounds like you've been through a lot." "I sure have," Wally said. "You know, Wally, I was taught that some things are just not meant to be. I think of that notion sometimes when I feel disappointed," Kenny said. "Okay, Mr. Rogers, I'm going to take a nappy now," Wally said. "That's a good choice." "Pleasant dreams, Spartacus," Kenny said. The trip back to Louisville was very quiet indeed. Wally was sullen and withdrawn. Kenny and I were careful to avoid agitating Wally. There was no point in discussing the wedding caper. That would have been a futile exercise, more appropriate for a psychiatrist or a probation officer. We were mostly just quiet and asleep when possible. We made it back to Louisville. We pulled into Kenny's parents' driveway. Kenny's mother, my Aunt Elaine, was working in her garden. She approached the country squire as we got out of the wagon. Aunt Elaine proceeded toward us with her friendly smile. She innocently asked, "How was the trip, boys?"